Since the overturning of Roe v. Wade, we have witnessed the horrifying effects of state abortion bans and restrictions. They've included harrowing stories of women being refused care, forced to suffer in parking lots. I was just discussing this with Senator Warren, until they become sick enough to be treated, and left to miscarry in lobby bathrooms. Now, according to a new report from ProPublica out today, we know that these bans have also resulted in the death of at least 2 patients in Georgia. This initial reporting focuses on the story of just one of those 2 patients, Amber Thurman. She was a 28-year-old single mother of 1. You can see a picture of her right there. She died on August 19th, 2022, just a month after Georgia's 6-week abortion ban went into effect. And because of that ban, Amber was forced to find care out of state in North Carolina. Now, when she returned home to Georgia, she had extremely rare complications, and on the evening of August 18th was rushed to the hospital after vomiting blood and passing out. As Amber's condition deteriorated due to acute severe sepsis, her doctors discussed initiating a procedure called a DNC, but Georgia had made performing that procedure a felony, with few exceptions. Any doctor who violated the new law could be prosecuted and face up to a decade in prison. So Amber waited, and she waited, and she waited. And after 20 hours, she was finally taken to an operating room. But by then, the situation was dire. And during the surgery, Amber's heart stopped. Now, according to the findings from Georgia's Maternal Mortality Review Committee that ProPublica obtained, there was a good chance that Amber's death would have been prevented if she had received a DNC earlier. This is post-Roe America. Amber's story is post-Roe America. Today would have been Amber Thurman's 31st birthday, and she should have lived to see it. Now, I want you to hold that story in your mind as you listen to what J.D. Vance said tonight in the state of Georgia.
Now, the Supreme Court's decision, it was not only a victory for the Constitution, it was a victory, it was a testament to the resolve of tens of millions of pro-life Americans who never gave up on the cause of life. Now, we're united in our gratitude and in our admiration for these devoted defenders of the unborn and for the judges, justices, and especially President Trump.
Overturning Roe was a victory, says J.D. Vance, in Georgia today. I know one thing, sure as hell wasn't a victory for Amber Thurman or her little boy who lost his mom. Joining me now is Senator Jon Ossoff of Georgia. He chairs the Senate Subcommittee on Human Rights. He was down in Atlanta just this morning, where he held the committee's second field hearing to directly hear from women and doctors on the impacts of Georgia's 6-week abortion ban. He's also married to an OB/GYN, who I'm sure impacts your thinking as well. So I want to start, Senator. I mean, the story I just told from ProPublica is shocking. It's upsetting. I had a hard time getting through it. It's not an anomaly. And you were in Georgia this morning. You've had these field hearings. You hear the stories. You're hearing the stories from these women who were experiencing the impacts of a 6-week abortion ban. What did you hear from some of these women this morning?
Jen, good to see you. Thank you for having me. And in this series of hearings, we've heard directly from OB/GYN doctors and from women whose pregnancies have been impacted by our state's extreme 6-week abortion ban. It's worth setting the scene. Before Donald Trump overturned Roe v. Wade and Governor Brian Kemp imposed this abortion ban, Georgia already had one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the country, and half of our counties lacked any OB/GYN at all. There's an underlying maternal mortality crisis in Georgia. What we've heard from OB/GYNs in these hearings is that, first of all, OB/GYNs are deterred from training and practicing in Georgia by the threat of criminal prosecution, worsening our state's OB/GYN shortage. Second of all, this law is putting women's lives at risk. It is delaying their access to care during complications, during high-risk pregnancies, and during miscarriages. And today we heard from 2 women who had high-risk or non-viable pregnancies, but were forced to continue those pregnancies or to leave the state to get care because their doctors feared prosecution.
It is so horrible to hear. And some of these standard forms of treatment, when there are bans, women don't have access to them. You raised the impact on doctors, and this is such an important part of it. And I did want to play some of this video from your hearing today, and we'll talk about it on the other side of one of the doctors.
Physicians, myself included, have seen patients in the ICU with sepsis, with renal failure, needing tube feeds, with hemorrhage, needing blood transfusions or a hysterectomy, who would not have been in those positions if we had been able to offer them care to avoid further harm.
I mean, you're taught, I'm not a doctor, but you're taught as a doctor to heal, to do no harm. These doctors are not able to do what they were taught to do in medical school. Talk to me a little bit about, you've mentioned it a little bit, but the impacts on kind of the medical profession and OBGYNs across Georgia who are trying to save women's lives and are unable to do it because of the law.
One OBGYN told the subcommittee a story. She was a young doctor, born and raised in Georgia, had wanted to practice in Georgia, but because of the threat of criminal prosecution for doing her job, had decided not to train or to practice in Georgia. Remember, we already have an underlying shortage of OBGYNs. So instead, she was practicing in Massachusetts. Well, a pregnant woman from Georgia who was having severe complications had to leave Georgia to get care. On the way, lost her pregnancy, wound up in this doctor's exam room in Massachusetts with sepsis, a life-threatening blood infection, because she'd been unable to get the care she needed in Georgia. So what we're clearly hearing from doctors and from women who have experienced pregnancy under Georgia's abortion ban is this having a severe impact on maternal health, and it's resulting in denied or delayed and potentially life-threatening denials and delays of care to women with high-risk pregnancies.
It is horrifying to hear these stories, they just stick with you. One of the things that we were talking about briefly before we started this conversation was just, it's not a secret what an abortion ban would be like across the country. I mean, a 6-week abortion ban is essentially, a lot of women don't even know they're pregnant by then. And so when Donald Trump and J.D. Vance say, just leave it back to the states, Georgia, you know what it's like in Georgia. This is what it could be like across the country. I want to just play something Senator Vance said about the possibility of a national abortion ban and talk a little bit about what people should know. You're living it. You're talking to these women who are experiencing it.
So he would veto a federal abortion ban?
I think he would. He said that explicitly, that he would.
J.D. Vance has said that you would veto it if it did come to your desk.
Well, I didn't discuss it with J.D.
So would he veto it?
Kristen, I think that I've learned my lesson on speaking for the president before he and I have actually talked about an issue.
I wanted to play that because it's often this talking point is we can punt it back to the states, and I think he would veto an abortion ban, but there's huge real world consequences here. What do you want people to know who use this talking point? Just send it back to the states. The states can decide. It will be fine.
Look, it's now been 2 years since Donald Trump overturned Roe. Brian Kemp banned abortion in Georgia at 6 weeks. We now have had the time to see the effect of these laws. And by listening to OBGYN doctors, by listening to women whose pregnancies and health have been impacted and threatened by these laws, we can see the devastating impact this is having on women in Georgia.